The shining light for democracy in the world is now, sliding towards authoritarianism pretty quickly from what we can see. Policymakers really need to understand this is a problem that is affecting them now. We aren't going to fact check our way out of this. Creating more websites that people who are affected by this don't read is not going to fix this problem.
Only a few years ago, the biggest purveyors of disinformation and viral lies on the internet tended to be Russia and a handful of crazy people on Twitter. Fast forward to today, and the biggest purveyors of disinformation are the President of the United States of America and the world's richest man. What kind of situation are we in currently?
Really what we're seeing is the state capture of disordered discourse, as I like to call it. So often when we kind of thought about disinformation in the past, we focus on outside actors like Russia, what impact that's having on our society. But I think what we've done is really not realize what the problem is. It's not a problem of just disinformation and misinformation. It's actually a more systematic issue. It's an issue that is actually about how the information landscape we exist in, that we've kind of developed our democracies in, has changed dramatically, and that's having a huge impact. And what I've been working on a lot is actually understanding what the framework of that is, what are the consistent elements when we're talking about everything from flat earthers to MAGA that are consistent throughout the system.
And how much do you think that's contributed to where we're at now?
I think it's entirely due to that. And I think it's not something that's unique to America. If you look at the drivers that are behind it, it's something that can happen in any country, really. This isn't just about disinformation coming from foreign actors and lies being told. It's basically the entire system that's been kind of created, that's evolved from algorithms and social media and various societal pressures that creates the circumstances where this discourse can be created. So if we look at it in terms of, the elements of this, it's, disinformation, which is, false information that's shared as an intent to deceive or harm. We have misinformation, which is false information, but that's shared by people who believe it's true, so not intentionally misleading people. And then you have malinformation. So this is information that has elements of truth, but it's framed in such a way to cause harm. We then look at what I call the agents of information disorder. So usually in the past we thought of it as, state actors, or, corrupt media, or however it may be, trying to influence our societies. But really, I would say there's four groups of these actors. They are the state level actors, political actors, the government, official politicians, those official sources. Then you have the proxies of state political and government power. So this could be, Russia Today, Press TV, the Internet Research Agency. You then have people who are kind of self-interested actors. So these are the kind of people who have their own reasons for sharing false information. And that could be people trying to grift, promote cryptocurrency, get algorithmic engagement to grow their own brand, or it can be something that's far more sinister. But at the center of it, you have people who really believe this, the true believers. And those are really like the key drivers or the key agents of how this stuff keeps on developing and growing, because they're all interacting. It isn't just a top-down system. It's a system now. We've gone from a kind of really top-down, elite-controlled gatekeeper model of information to a peer-to-peer model. So what we're really seeing is discourse that emerges from that. And that discourse can actually go down a path that turns it into what I call disordered discourse, so where it's based off misinformation and disinformation. And we're seeing that happening in the US at the moment, and how that captures government power and what impact that has, because you now have basically a government that is within a bubble of information that is defining how they see the world. So they feel justified in doing all these things that to us and other people seem absolutely terrible.
And how big a role has Russia played in this? Because I don't want to suggest that they've been pulling the strings on a kind of a Illuminati level, but they must be quite pleased with the disordered discourse, as you call it, that they see every day and what's happening in the White House right now.
They are, but to be honest, I think Fox News had more of an impact on this than Russia today. It's not something that just happened in the last several years. I think one reason that this has happened in the US before other democracies is because there has been decades of culture wars, of divisive politics, and really in the post-social media era, we've seen these different factors, this shift in how information is shared, these kind of peer-to-peer networks that share them, really impacting how this discourse is created. I like to use the example of the Dominion voting kind of situation, where that started as basically online conspiracy theories. But because it fit a narrative that benefited a political party, the media organizations who supported that, Fox News, Newsmax, kind of mainstreamed those views. It brought them from online forums onto the TV news, and the Republican Party saw that as a way to gain a political advantage in an argument. And these are not all people who are working towards really this from the same perspective. That if you look at the emails that were linked from or were published as part of the Dominion case against Fox News, in a way they almost became victims of the discourse they created, because they realized their audience wanted to hear more. Even though they knew it wasn't true, they still put this stuff on there. Not everyone in the system has to believe in it, but they all have their own drivers for participating in the system. And eventually that led to legal processes starting. It became part of really the mainstream orthodoxy within the MAGA movement. But it wasn't because every single person in there believed it. It's because they all had their own individual motivations, drivers, and intent to participate in the creation of that disordered discourse. And that really started more broadly to capture the entire Republican Party, because I don't believe every single Republican senator or House representative believes the stuff they're saying that supports the discourse that's emerging from the White House, but they have to, because they are part of that system of disordered discourse. And when you have these systems, it creates basically an ideology. And if you start straying outside of that ideology, you become the enemy. And when you're trying to hold on to your seat, your political position, have access to power, it's easier, more useful for your purposes to bend the knee than to challenge that power. And this is how we create a system like we have in the US, where disordered discourse has come to dominate the political landscape.
I mean, how big a crisis is this? Because, what we're fundamentally talking about here is what is truth. And that seems to be, it's kind of cliche to say it, but we're in sort of 1984 territory here, right?
Well, in 1984, you had a central authority who was controlling information. And really, if you look at, through histories, the study of power of democracy, of how we, make decisions, is really based on the concept that in one way or another, elites control the information that we see through the media, through government. And this was written about in 1922 by someone called Walter Lippmann, who wrote a book called Public Opinion, which kind of explained how public opinion is formed. And this was later discussed in other areas. Noam Chomsky wrote Manufacturing Consent, which is a term that was used by Walter Lippmann, but he said this was actually used for propaganda purposes. You have discussions of how discourse created through this top-down system kind of sets the reality that we live in. That you can be on the left or right of that, you can have one opinion or the other, but we have a shared reality. But now, because we exist in a system where we have these kind of peer-to-peer networks, we connect through social media, it's no longer that, if you want to have influence, you have to kind of study, become a journalist or a politician, wait until you're in your early 30s to really have an impact. Now, if you're a 13-year-old with social media, you're retweeting, sharing, engaging with information on the algorithm, you are already creating, on a kind of micro level, an impact. And at scale, what that starts doing is bring people, filtering them towards basically the viewpoints that reinforce what they already believe, and creates these bubbles that people are drawn into. And part of the issue, I think, is that we don't teach critical thinking skills. We don't engage people with the democratic process itself. And we've kind of designed our entire democratic system around that old model of elite control, whilst really now we live in a completely different model. But the kind of old system is still trying to cling on to what it used to have, but it's changing. And the problem is, if we don't adapt our democracies to this changing system, what starts happening is exactly what's happened in the US, that it becomes a matter of, the control. It becomes a matter of, how do we grab the discourse? How do we grab the narratives that's emerging from these systems? Donald Trump does not control the narrative. He is as much a participant in its creation as anyone else is. It's just he's in a position of power where he can actually do something with that. It's like if a bunch of flat earthers got into the White House. It's effectively the same thing. It's the same system of information that's brought them into that worldview as, the MAGA movement has been brought into their own worldview.
So what can be done, if anything, to combat it?
It would be easy for me to say, just think carefully about what you share on the internet, but the problem is much, much bigger than that. It is a fundamental change to how democratic systems operate, and we have to look at it on that term. We need to, first of all, at education, we need to integrate critical thinking skills into education from primary level onwards. And that's not saying everyone has to start picking up, complex political texts. It's been done in Finland, it's been done in Estonia. It's possible to do that. We also have to create opportunities for democratic participation, not just when someone's, become an MP or a journalist and they're in their 30s, but, how do you engage young people with that? How do you actually make them appreciate that democracy has a value to them? How do you make them appreciate that democracy has a value to them on a personal level, on a local level, and it allows them to actually engage with that, not just in terms of saying you get to vote every 5 years, but we live in a system where people are constantly engaged with topics and information. How do you actually turn that engagement into something that has a positive impact? At Bellingcat, we've already been working with secondary schools and developing material around this, but it needs government level involvement. Governments need to look at their education system, look at the information system they now exist in, and realise those things have changed. We at Bellingcat are currently working with universities to help develop course material around open source investigation, but also create investigative hubs where students can investigate stuff they care about, but also connect them to systems where they can actually have an impact from that work through the media, through connecting to policymakers, through other NGOs who have influence in different areas. We need to enrich our democracy, because otherwise we're going to have a slide towards authoritarianism, and we are seeing that happen now. This is not a tomorrow problem. This is a problem that occurred yesterday, and we're dealing with the impact of it now.
And you've just talked about the US as sort of already succumbing to this, but are there other countries in particular which you think could be next where this might happen?
Every democracy in the world faces this threat, because all the drivers, all the factors exists everywhere. There's many complex drivers behind this. Part of it is kind of, directly because of algorithmic engagement on social media and how that recommends content that reinforces our views. There's social issues behind that, a lack of trust in democratic institutions because we no longer see them as being responsive to our needs. So a strong man can come along and say, I promise to fix everything, only I can fix it, which seems to be a very effective message in certain parts of the world. The way in which I really think that the media, the traditional media and politicians don't understand the shift in power that's happening at the moment. So that creates more vulnerabilities. There's many, many drivers that are involved with this, and they exist in different contexts in every democracy in the world. So everyone is at risk of this if we don't actually rise up to the moment and actually have significant change in how we approach how people engage with democracies. And it's not enough to say you can vote a bit more. It has to be far, far, far more fundamental and far more direct.
So you've talked about one of the ways of combating this would be to educate young people, but does that mean that older people who are already sort of in this way of thinking, are they like lost causes, or is there anything that can be done there?
I personally think, it's not nice to say it, but if you're in this disordered disinformation system, you already know the truth. It's not the truth that everyone else agrees with, but within that system, they don't agree with you because they're either liars or fools. So you have no reason to listen to those people. So if someone comes along and fact checks you, it's like, okay, well, you're part of the conspiracy against my system. It makes it really, really hard to reach those people. And if this is happening at such a high level that it is controlling elements of the government, the judiciary, like we're seeing in the US, then it's even harder. Because what's going to start happening is these messages that the people within the system believe are going to be taught to people. They're going to be the messages that start dominating communication, that dominate the discourse. And that begins to slice towards authoritarianism. And if you're looking at what's happening at the US at the moment, it's pretty hard to deny that's not the case.
How do you feel about all this? Are you optimistic, or do you think that it is a potentially insurmountable challenge and we're just on a slide towards authoritarianism?
I think there's a massive, massive risk presented by this. It's very clear this is happening already. It's happened in, what was, the shining light for democracy in the world is now, sliding towards authoritarianism pretty quickly from what we can see. I think the reaction to this, I think in Europe, policymakers really need to understand this is a problem that is affecting them now, that little fixes, we aren't going to fact check our way out of this. Creating more websites that people who are affected by this don't read is not going to fix this problem. It has to be fundamental to how we educate people, how we engage people in democracy. And this is not something that's got a quick fix behind it. This is something that's generational. It's going to take a long time to fix this. And our hope has to be that states understand that they need to react to this really, really quickly, that the civil society sector recognize what's happening here. They need to start thinking outside of the boxes they're in, because I think part of the reason we're in the problem we're in at the moment is because, the counter-disinformation community has focused on the idea of this being outside interference when it's really such a much, much bigger issue that we need to have a systematic approach to this. And if we don't develop those approaches and start implementing them very, very quickly, sliding towards authoritarianism is inevitable in my mind. And I would advise people to find communities that are working on things on a fact-based level. Bellingcat has a great community of people who do investigations, we work off evidence, we try and have impact from that. But in a sense, we are a drop in an ocean versus this kind of algorithmically created content that draws people into disordered discourse. You need to start thinking about how the information you're being served online reinforces what you believe. It's kind of this idea that, democracies rely on freedom of speech. The thing is that relies on free speech being on an even playing field, but that doesn't exist in an algorithmically mediated system because the algorithm is rewarding engagement. It doesn't reward the truth. So what starts happening is free speech starts becoming about how many people you can engage rather than the truth behind that speech. And we need to kind of have our own standards in terms of really thinking about, what is the information we're sharing? What is the information we're engaging with? What discourse are we creating ourselves? But really fundamentally, this is such a large issue that, individuals can do something, but it's about entire communities and societies reacting to this and finding the solution together.
Thanks for watching. We could only bring interviews like this with the support of our members. Do please consider signing up, and you can do that at kyivindependent.com/membership.